The text from my father arrived 30 minutes before my sister's wedding. If you're not in that church by noon, don't expect another dollar for college. He thought those words would scare me. My mother agreed. My golden sister even laughed over speakerphone, saying I'd come crawling because I couldn't survive without them. So I drove to the wedding, not because I needed their money, but because I wanted to see the look on their faces when they discovered the truth. 6 months earlier, I'd already graduated at the top of my class, and I was quietly earning more money than my father had ever made in his life. My father gave me exactly 30 minutes to choose between my future and my family. His text arrived while I was finishing a client meeting. If you're not sitting in your sister's wedding by noon, don't expect another cent for your college tuition. I stared at the message for a long moment before smiling. Not because it was funny, because my parents were threatening to take away something I hadn't needed in over 6 months. They just didn't know it yet. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 24 years old, and this story began on the day my parents discovered they had spent years trying to control a daughter who had quietly outgrown them. Growing up, there were always 2 children in our house. My older sister, Jessica, was the golden child. I was simply the backup. Jessica's birthdays looked like magazine parties. Mine were pizza and grocery store cake. Jessica got a brand new SUV when she turned 18 because she needed reliable transportation. When I left for college, Dad handed me the keys to his 12-year-old sedan and reminded me not to scratch it because he still planned to sell it someday. Whenever relatives visited, my parents proudly showed off Jessica's dance trophies, engagement photos, and promotions. When people asked about me, Mom usually smiled politely and said, "Emily's still figuring things out." Even after I'd earned scholarship after scholarship, even after graduating at the top of every semester, to them, I would always be the child who came second. I stopped trying to compete years ago. Instead, I focused on building a life they couldn't control. College became my escape. I studied computer science because I loved solving problems that actually had logical answers. Families didn't. During my junior year, I landed a remote internship with a cybersecurity company. The pay wasn't incredible, but the experience changed everything. My manager noticed my work ethic and started giving me projects meant for full-time engineers. By the beginning of my senior year, they offered me a permanent position if I graduated first in my class. I accepted before they finished the sentence. 6 months ago, I graduated. Not only did I graduate, I finished number 1 in my class. My company immediately promoted me to security engineer. The salary was higher than anything I had imagined earning before turning 25. Within weeks, I paid off my remaining student balance myself. I opened investment accounts, started saving for a condo, and quietly built a financial future that no longer depended on anyone else's approval. I never told my parents. Some people might wonder why. The answer was simple. Every achievement I shared somehow became Jessica's accomplishment. When I earned a scholarship, Dad said it helped because he could spend more on Jessica's wedding. When I got promoted during my internship, Mom asked if I could loan Jessica money for bridal decorations. Every success I had became another resource for my sister. So I stopped giving them access to my victories. As far as they knew, I was still finishing my last semester, still relying on tuition checks, still vulnerable, still controllable. Then Jessica got engaged. From the day Brandon proposed, the entire family revolved around her wedding. Every phone call became about flower arrangements. Every family dinner turned into conversations about venues, photographers, and seating charts. Dad emptied part of his retirement account to pay for a ballroom Jessica insisted she deserved. Mom proudly called it the wedding everyone would remember forever. Apparently, I was expected to help make that happen. 3 days before the ceremony, Dad called. "You're coming early Friday," he said. "I have work. You'll take time off." "I can't." His voice hardened. "If you don't show up, don't expect me to keep paying your tuition." There it was. The same threat he'd used for years whenever I disagreed with him. Only this time, it had no power. I almost laughed. Instead, I calmly answered, "I'll be there." He sounded satisfied. "Good. I knew you'd make the right decision." After he hung up, my phone rang again. Jessica. She didn't even bother saying hello. "So, Dad finally reminded you who pays your bills. I leaned back in my chair. Something like that. She laughed. I told Brandon you'd show up. You always do. You can't survive without Mom and Dad. I glanced around my apartment. The apartment I paid for. The laptop sitting on my desk. The company ID beside it. The offer letter tucked safely inside my filing cabinet. Everything around me existed because of my work, not theirs. Jessica kept talking. Just don't embarrass me at the wedding. I won't, I replied. After she hung up, I looked at the expensive suit hanging beside my closet door. Not one my father bought. Not one chosen for a struggling college student. One I had purchased after signing my first six-figure employment contract. My parents thought I was driving to that wedding because I couldn't afford to lose their tuition money. The truth was, I was driving there to watch the biggest lie in our family finally fall apart. The church parking lot was already overflowing when I arrived. Luxury cars lined both sides of the entrance. Valets hurried from one vehicle to another while photographers chased smiling relatives through the flower-covered courtyard. Everything looked perfect. Exactly the kind of wedding my sister had dreamed about. I stepped out of my car wearing the navy blue suit I'd bought with my own paycheck and walked toward the entrance carrying nothing but a small gift bag. No one greeted me. Not my mother. Not my father. Not even Jessica. Instead, my Aunt Linda spotted me first. There she is, she called loudly. Emily finally made it. Your father was worried you'd skip after everything he's paying for. Several relatives turned toward me with sympathetic smiles. I simply nodded. Inside the bridal suite, Jessica was surrounded by bridesmaids, makeup artists, and photographers. The moment she saw me, she smiled. Not warmly. Victorious. I knew Dad's tuition speech would work. A few bridesmaids laughed. Jessica adjusted her veil before adding, "It's amazing how quickly people become cooperative when someone else pays their bills." I smiled politely. "I'm glad your wedding is going well." She frowned. My calm response wasn't what she'd expected. Usually, I defended myself. Today, I didn't. Dad walked into the room carrying his tuxedo jacket. "There she is," he announced proudly. "I told everyone you'd come to your senses." He placed an arm around Jessica's shoulders. "This family sacrifices a lot for each other." The sentence hung in the air like a performance rehearsed 100 times. Mom entered seconds later. She kissed Jessica's forehead before turning toward me. "I'm happy you finally made the mature decision." "I wouldn't have missed it," I answered. She smiled with obvious relief. "Good. Maybe now everyone can stop worrying about unnecessary drama." The ceremony itself was beautiful. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows. The choir sang softly. Guests wiped away happy tears as Jessica walked down the aisle holding Dad's arm. I watched quietly from the third row. Not because I felt emotional, because I couldn't stop noticing how carefully my parents maintained appearances. To everyone else, they looked like loving, generous parents. Only I knew how often generosity had been used as a leash. After the ceremony, everyone moved into the ballroom for the reception. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Every table carried towering white roses. A live jazz band played near the dance floor. It easily looked like a six-figure event. Dad loved attention. Within 30 minutes, he had gathered a small audience near the bar. I was speaking with one of Brandon's cousins when I heard my name. "Emily's still finishing college," Dad was saying proudly. "I told her education comes first, so I've continued paying everything myself." Several guests nodded approvingly. "That's incredibly generous," one older gentleman said. Dad gave his favorite humble smile. "You never stop being a parent." My stomach tightened. There it was again. The story he'd been telling everyone. As if he were carrying me through life. Mom joined him. "We've sacrificed a lot so both our daughters could succeed." Jessica overheard and added with a grin, "Emily's lucky Dad doesn't give up on her." Laughter circled the group. Someone turned toward me. "So, what are you studying?" Before I could answer, Dad interrupted. "She's still figuring out exactly where she wants to end up." Another chuckle. I finally spoke. "Actually," the room became quiet. "I already know where I ended up." Dad looked confused. What does that mean? I looked directly at him. I graduated. Silence. Jessica blinked. Mom frowned.
Dad actually laughed.
No, you're graduating next semester. I shook my head.
No.
I graduated 6 months ago. Nobody spoke. I continued calmly. I finished first in my class. A woman holding a champagne glass whispered, "First?" I nodded. My company hired me immediately after graduation. Dad stared at me. What company? Sentinel Cyber Defense. One of Brandon's uncles suddenly looked surprised. I know Sentinel. He studied me carefully. They're one of the fastest-growing cybersecurity firms in the country. I smiled. That's the one. Mom forced a laugh. Emily, why would you keep something like that secret? Because every achievement somehow became Jessica's. No one interrupted. I continued. I've been working there for 6 months. I've already paid off my student balance. I've rented my own apartment. And I paused just long enough for every eye in the room to settle on me. I've been earning more than Dad for quite a while now. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Even the band seemed quieter. Dad's face lost every trace of color. Jessica looked from me to him, as though waiting for someone to say it was a joke. No one did. Then Brandon's father slowly folded his arms. He looked directly at my parents before asking one calm, simple question that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the ballroom. If Emily already graduated 6 months ago. He glanced toward my father. Then where did all the tuition money you told everyone you were still paying actually go? No one answered Brandon's father's question. Not my father. Not my mother. Not even Jessica. The ballroom that had been filled with laughter only seconds earlier had become painfully quiet. Every conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes shifted toward my parents. Dad cleared his throat. That's a private family matter. Brandon's father didn't move. I only asked because you just told everyone you've been paying Emily's tuition.
He looked at me.
She says she graduated 6 months ago. Then back at my father. So, I'm simply wondering where those payments were going. Dad forced a smile. It isn't as simple as that. No. Brandon's mother spoke for the first time. Then explain it. Mom stepped forward quickly. This really isn't the time or place. I nodded. You're right. Everyone looked at me. So, let's keep it simple. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my wallet. Inside was my employee identification badge. I handed it to Brandon's father. He studied it for a moment before reading aloud. Emily Carter, Senior Security Engineer. Several guests exchanged surprised looks. A senior engineer? Someone whispered. At 24? I smiled. I was promoted 2 months ago. The whispers grew louder. Dad suddenly raised his voice.
Fine. She has a job.
So what? I still supported her for years. Everything she has started because of us. For years. Those words would have crushed me. Today, they sounded empty. I met his eyes. You gave me a place to live. You paid part of my tuition. And I was grateful. But every dollar came with conditions. If I disagreed with you, you threatened to stop paying. If I missed family events, you threatened to stop paying. If I made choices you didn't like, you threatened to stop paying. It was never support. It was control. Dad's jaw tightened. I was trying to teach responsibility.
No.
I shook my head. You were teaching obedience. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Emily, we only wanted what was best for you. I looked at her gently. Then why did what was best for Jessica always matter more? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I continued. When I earned scholarships, you used the savings for Jessica. When I worked internships, you asked me to help pay for Jessica. When I graduated first in my class, you never even knew. Because neither of you asked. Jessica suddenly stepped forward. Oh, please. This isn't about Mom and Dad. You're jealous. The room turned toward her. She folded her arms confidently. You've always hated that people paid attention to me. I almost laughed. No, Jessica. I stopped wanting your attention years ago. I wanted respect. There's a difference. Her confident expression disappeared. I looked around the ballroom. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came because Dad believed he could still control my life. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, then quietly turned the screen toward my father. My last paycheck. His eyes widened. Several digits sat on the screen. Far more than he expected. I wasn't showing off. I was ending the illusion. I haven't needed tuition. I haven't needed financial help. I haven't needed permission. Not for a long time. Dad slowly lowered his head. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say. Brandon finally broke the silence. He looked at Jessica. You knew. Jessica hesitated. No, I answered. She didn't. I never told anyone. Brandon nodded slowly, then looked at my parents. So today wasn't about money. It was about control. Neither of them denied it. The wedding coordinator quietly announced dinner. But no one moved. The celebration had lost its sparkle. People weren't talking about flowers anymore. They were talking about truth. I walked over to the gift table and placed my wrapped present beside the others. Jessica watched silently. So, she said quietly, you're just leaving? I smiled. I came because Dad told me I'd lose my future if I didn't. I glanced around the ballroom one last time. The funny thing is, I already had one. Without waiting for another response, I walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. Outside, the evening air felt lighter than it had in years. 3 months later, I signed the papers on my first condo. Paid entirely with money I'd earned myself. A few relatives reached out after the wedding. Some apologized for believing the stories they'd been told. Others admitted they had never realized how differently my parents treated us. As for my parents, we barely speak now. Not because I hate them. Because peace is easier than proving my worth to people who never wanted to see it. Sometimes people think success is the best revenge. They're wrong. The best revenge is reaching a place where someone else's approval no longer decides your happiness. That day, I didn't leave my sister's wedding feeling victorious. I left feeling something far more valuable.
Free.